Welcome to Legal Wellbeing in Action, the podcast series of the New Mexico Wellbeing Committee. This year, we'll be focusing on a new campaign called What a Healthy Legal Community Looks Like. Last year, we focused on you, our listeners, as the individual, but this year, the Wellbeing campaign is looking to understand the state of well-being in legal organizations and to enlist those leaders' help with defining what well-being looks like for their populace, identifying priorities for the community, measure, evaluate, and improve. The New Mexico Wellbeing Committee would love to hear from you and your area of the legal community or your work environment. What health and well-being initiatives are in place where you work? What ideas do you or your colleagues have for improvement? What practice, resource, or service is in place where you work that you're particularly proud of? So for this episode, this is going to be part 2 of our solo and small firm attorneys. Last month, we heard from Briggs Cheney, Tina Cruz, and Jim Wilkey on some of the obstacles that solo and small firm attorneys face. Our 3 speakers have returned for part 2, and this time they're going to be sharing more of what they do for well-being and how they see well-being as being intentional about oneself, and those little steps that they take in well-being that works for them and them only in that regard. So from here, I will let our guests take it away. Briggs, Tina, and Jim, it's great to have you back. I have fully enjoyed the last episode, and I'm eager to hear what the new one's going to be. Lastly, and most importantly, a big thank you to our listeners for tuning into Legal Wellbeing in Action. We hope to hear from all of you, and as always, we hope you enjoy.
Thank you, Tanessa, for that introduction, and thank you for having us on Legal Wellbeing in Action for part 2 of the solo and small firm attorney topic. In our first podcast, we discussed why the world of solo and small firm lawyers is different, and we discussed some of the obstacles, real and perceived, that seem to get in the way of us solo and small firm lawyers in terms of caring for ourselves. Tina and Jim are returning with me to talk more about some of the ideas we all have in when it comes to being, and I underscore this word, intentional with our well-being as solo and small firm practitioners. So with that introduction, let me again ask, I'm joined today by Tina Cruz and Jim Wilkey, but let me ask you to introduce yourself briefly for our listeners.
Hi, Briggs. It's good to see you again. Thank you for continuing the conversation. As noted, my name is Tina Cruz. I'm a sole practitioner, having practiced for over 20 years now, primarily based out of Taos. I also have an office in Santa Fe. Some who are attending today may recall that I served as state bar president in 2020. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Tina. And Jim, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself as well.
Sure. Hey, Briggs, it's good to see you again. Tina, it's nice to see you as well. It's nice to be back. I work in a small firm, about 7 lawyers. And I've been here for about 8 years. And so, I just looking forward to the conversation, and I enjoyed the last one immensely.
Okay, well, thank you both. And in our first session, we did talk about, although it was a pleasant session and whatnot, but we talked about the things that I kind of look at as being the obstacles for lawyers who practice in a solo setting and small firm setting. So that was kind of the bad news, if you will. And we discussed the fact of, where well-being can or can't fit into those practice or legal communities. And so today we want to talk a little bit about, what are some of the things that each of you have done to work on your well-being. And last time I started off with Tina, so let me be fair, and I'll pick on Jim first. What are some of the things, Jim, that you and I practice in the same law firm? I'm of counsel, so I get to I get to watch you a little bit, so you need to be careful today. I see some of the good things you do and some of the bad things, maybe, or not bad things, but things that make me say, gosh, I need to lean on you a little bit. So with that introduction, tell us a little bit about what is Jim Wilkey doing to deal with his well-being?
Well, it sounds like I need to get some security here so I can make sure that I'm not being watched by Briggs. No, kidding. It's been a sort of a transitional thing for me, and it's funny because Tina mentioned meditation during our last conversation, and so I have a meditation app, and I use it very sporadically, and it's probably the hardest thing for me to get to use because for whatever reason, it's like the first thing to go if I get busy or distracted in life. But I'll be darned, every time I sit down and take like 5 to 8 minutes and just try to breathe and do whatever the app is telling me to do in terms of being still and sort of taking time out. I'll be darned if it doesn't help every time, and I feel great. But then again, of course, I don't stick with it. So that's a real challenge for me. But the things that that work for me, or sort of work for me, I guess, is I do try to exercise pretty regularly. I'll take lunches and go to the gym and stuff like that. So that's stuff that I can do pretty regularly, and so that's always good. I still will get busy and stay up too late and do things like that. But, these days, I've got a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old. So, I really enjoy taking time to be with my family, and that's a good investment of my time, and having kids and having that change in my life has kind of opened my eyes to that. It also forces you, frankly, as a lawyer, to get some perspective, because I think we all have a tendency to get into a rut and get tunnel vision when it comes to the practice of law. And you can miss out on a lot of you can blink and your kid's all of a sudden 6 and 9, and the time has just flown by. So for me, just taking time with family, it's really so important, and it really causes you to have some hard conversations internally with yourself about how to take care of yourself better, and have a long-term approach to your personal life and your family life, and of course the practice of law. So I don't know if any of it works for me, but I'm certainly thinking about these things more so than I ever did before. So.
And that's wonderful. And I'm going to, in the first podcast, I talked about the fact that you because we do work in the same place, and you're just on the other side of the wall, even as we are on this podcast. I look at you sometimes as a little bit of in a test tube. I mean, I get to watch you, and so I'm going to come back and pick on you on some of the things you said just now, and not pick on you, but maybe get you to elaborate a little bit. But Tina, let me turn to you. What saith the past president of the state bar?
Well, Briggs, the journey related to well-being for me in a lot of ways is an evolving one, as with most things in life. One of the primary reasons why I returned to northern New Mexico in 2011 is because I was never much of a fan of city living, and I wanted to get back home. And it was a decision that for me in a lot of ways has sustained me, because I've been able to get closer to family. I'm able to wake up in the mornings living in a rural setting, one that I was accustomed to, having grown up in northern New Mexico. When I returned back home in 2011, my paternal grandmother and maternal grandfather were still living. They were in their 90s and 80s, and being able to spend more time with them before they passed away was really important. So sometimes the practice of law, it becomes a situation where you have to look externally, right? And think to yourself, would I be better suited to be doing maybe different work in a different setting? It may be going to another office within a community. It may just be saying, I've completed my 10 years at a firm and I was a partner and I developed so many important connections and relationships, but it's time for me to do something that's going to elevate my well-being and my worldview in some way. So, my more recent sort of existence as an attorney has just really been focused more on those interpersonal connections, being closer to family, and being able to better balance the practice by not being all consumed with the work.
Wow. Like Jim, I'm glad this is a podcast, not a video. I almost could, you make me almost want to shed a tear, Tina. Let me ask you, at the outset today, I used the word intentional and said underscore that. What I hear you saying that I hadn't really thought about till you were talking is that you did something intentional in your life. And for you, you did have the experience of working in a bigger urban area. And then you made a decision, an intentional decision to go back to your home. And we talked in the first podcast, you used the term that I like so much, joyful place. But would it be fair to say that what you did, that intentional decision, that personal decision to return to Taos and to your family, is it fair to say that's an act of well-being, an act of someone doing something? I like in the article that accompanies this, I use the word selfish and self-centered. Is that a selfish act? Am I hearing that as a selfish act where Tina's doing something for her own well-being?
In a lot of ways, it was, Briggs. It was clear that it was time to do something different. And as I was mapping out what that different existence might look like, the very first thing that came to mind was returning back home. You made reference to Taos, so I'm going to take a quick moment to pause and say my practice is in Taos. I am a Taos Tiger, having graduated from Taos in 1992. Pero no soy de Tauseña. I'm not from Taos. And I wouldn't even say that I'm a Peñasquera, closer to Peñasco, right? My former law partner, when he would introduce me in terms of, meeting clients in northern New Mexico, he used to like to, assign cases based upon where you were from. So I handled a lot of cases on the civil defense side in northern New Mexico. And his introduction was, she's from a suburb of Peñasco. So yeah, it was very purposeful, deciding to return to the community where I grew up at El Valle in the southern part of Taos County. You have to go on a dirt road to get to where I live. And you all saw a picture of that, earlier when I was sharing with you all, what it looked like in my local community during the winter time. So yeah, it was very deliberate. It was very purposeful, Briggs. It was a decision to not feel that I wanted to continue overextending myself in the practice in some ways, because I didn't really have a lot of family in Albuquerque when I worked there. Most of my time was spent at the office, staying in the office until 9 o'clock at night, getting to the office early, working weekends. It was really all consuming. And I very quickly realized that it wasn't something that was sustaining me from an interpersonal perspective. And the practice needs to be more than just the work, we need to be able to think about our emotional, our social well-being. And I'm a bit of a private kind of person. I don't really, have a very large social circle necessarily. My focus has always been my family in a lot of ways. So yeah, it was intentional. I knew that I'd be able to come back home, and my neighbor was going to be my grandma. And, my dad, he used to love going to her house to share a cup of coffee with her in the morning. And one day I walked in and he said to her in Spanish, mira quién llegó, la vecina. And, in English, that's look who came by, the neighbor. And I thought to myself, well, I'm your daughter and I'm her granddaughter, but if you want to refer to me as la vecina, so be it. Right? So the fact that I was able to return home and become la vecina while still practicing law was really just such a blessing, Briggs. So I'm getting sort of emotional here, just reflecting on that period. But sometimes we really do need to be intentional with regard to what our existence looks like, and be mindful that the work is always going to be there and we're always going to be busy, but we need to attend to other aspects of our lives as well.
Well, Tina, wow, you're touching me. That's, and I'm going to tie this in at the end with something that Jim doesn't say it. I'll say it for him, which is in his way saying what you're saying, and I'll also maybe express something that I guess the beauty of what I see in our discussion this afternoon is how we all view these things. We're all talking about the same thing. We're all have the same goals, and we find them different ways. But let me jump back to Jim. You mentioned something, and as I say, I do get to watch you, and you make me smile because you've got young kids. And let me ask you, what changed? What was the difference? Where has family come into dealing with how Jim Wilkey practices and how Jim Wilkey worries about his well-being?
Well, I'm gonna push back on something you said, Briggs, and it's not, it's just you use the word selfish, and I heard you say that, and I know what you're trying to say. I think what you're getting at is that we as lawyers have particular challenges with respect to doing things for ourselves. And I guess I would probably use the word intentional like Tina used. I think it's the same concept we're talking about, but I guess the pushback on that is that, for me, having young children, and then, with the birth of my daughter beginning from that point on, that was the catalyst for me to have, frankly, a lot of hard conversations with myself about how do I want to live, and how do I want to take care of these kids and be a better father and a better human being and all that stuff. So the conversation went from how do I try to be a better lawyer and practice, to how do I take on these broader challenges and so, or broader responsibilities, I guess. And the funny thing about that is that I don't think it's selfish at all. I think when we invest time in ourselves and our family and our health and our mental well-being, that makes us better in every aspect of our life. It's just investing that time, and that's, I think, what lawyers struggle with. I know I do, is giving myself license to do those kinds of things. But I can see it with my kids, because I like the intentional word that Tina used, because I was sitting down with my daughter the other day, and she just got her first iPad, and she was showing me some of the features on that, and we ended up spending, you know, a good bit of time just doing that, and you know, just having little moments where we get to spend time, and I can tell from her standpoint she appreciates that, and that makes me feel so good. So you know, I don't know if I'm rambling here, but I think, yeah, I think, you know, if you can give yourself license to step back away from the practice of law and invest time in yourself and then the things that matter outside of the practice, it makes you better all around. So it's sort of an investment, I think.
And you're right, and I appreciate your taking me to task on.
Oh, come on.
Vocabulary.
Come on.
And it's and you're correct. But I am kind of touched today because I listened to both of you, and you both are saying the same things, but in your own situations. And what I've noticed this last couple of years, Tina mentioned it in our first or somewhere in our discussions about when she was, I think, president of the state bar, and this task force was getting together. And I really questioned my own well-being. And as time has gone by over the last couple of years, I've had to stop myself and realize that there are some things I do that are really, it is Briggs being a little selfish for himself, but I didn't see them. And I listened to Tina and the story of an intentional decision to go back to where she grew up and to be with family. And I listened to you talk about your daughter and the ability to have a moment or moments with her with her iPad. It isn't just, I mean, you do go exercise, which I was going to not pick on you, but make a point. I mean, there are some things you do intentionally, and I'm going to get Tina here in a second to talk about her meditation pillow. But there are, you know, when we think of well-being, we think of, well, we have to meditate, we have to go to the gym, there's all those things that seem to be on everyone's list of well-being. And what you all reinforce for me and make me think about is that sometimes it's not those little bells and whistles, those little things that seem like what you're supposed to do if your well-being is really good. It's more important than that. It's more, I can't even come up with the right word, but to listen to both of you talk about something as personal, that were decisions that were, I have to, you know, not a difficult decision, but to make a change in one's life, like Tina's described for us, or for you to say, this is more important. You know, sometimes we have to take a little inventory, stop and say, you know, maybe Tina's okay. Maybe Jim's okay. Maybe I am doing some things. You know, we sometimes don't give ourselves enough credit. So let me, because Tina mentioned it in our first podcast about the meditation pillow, we can't let that go without further explanation. But have we used the meditation pillow since we last talked, Tina?
Briggs, I purposefully, at the conclusion of our last visit, did have an opportunity to use the meditation pillow. You know, I mentioned it during the last visit in terms of, you know, how sometimes we do know that well-being needs to be top of mind, and we do some things to move ourselves in that direction, but then we get consumed by other things, distracted, busy. And that pillow had not been used. But I purposefully purchased it, you know, in 2021 to, you know, have it in my office as a reminder that I need to be more deliberate with regard to engaging in some self-reflection on a day-to-day basis. And I think if we can, you know, in terms of within our own office and our space, set ourselves up to have those reminders in some ways, it gives us an opportunity to, take that break. I have my Apple Watch, which reminds me to stand. I have my stand-up desk, which reminds me, okay, you should maybe not be sitting all day. Being a cradle Catholic and I'm very connected to my faith. I have those reminders within my office as well. I think it looks different for all of us in some way based upon what our worldview is, but building in those reminders is really important to engage in that self-care. And much like Jim, I cannot step away from our final visit at Briggs without taking you to task about this reference to, are we being selfish by attending to ourselves? I think some of that comes from how we are indoctrinated in this profession, right? If you're not focused on the work, you're not really doing what needs to be done. And in that regard, if you're doing anything that deviates from work, you're being selfish. And, I have a friend who has regularly been reminding me over the course of the last year, be good to Tina. And I think if we look at it through that perspective, right, I'm not being selfish. Instead, I'm being good to myself. It's a little bit easier to sort of move in that direction of taking care of yourself. And, one of the nice things about the report that came out in 2017, the lawyer well-being report, which I would recommend all attorneys take a look at it because it's so informative, and we're coming up on the 5-year mark of when this report was issued, is that our well-being is defined by more than just the occupational aspects of what we do, right? There's the emotional components, social, physical, spiritual, intellectual, right? There's so much more to who we are as attorneys than just the work. The work is important. We have a whole code of professional rules that are at play that remind us of that. And we always can do better. We can always strive to improve as it relates to the work. But if we focus on the work to the detriment of these other aspects of who we are as attorneys, it's not serving us well. And I'm an offender of it, as most other people are in some ways, but it's just good to maybe have that, hard reset periodically. Like, where am I sort of deviating from the best practices, and what can I do a little bit differently to sort of be more in tune with what I need so I can be good to Tina. And it's not selfish, Briggs.
And I will say to you, as I said to Jim, thank you for taking me to task. And Tanessa knows, and Pam Moore, that I have I don't know if it's a good trait or a bad trait, but I often will say things that in my own mind seem provocative to spark something. And I will tell you that when there's an article that goes with this, these podcasts, and in there I talk about selfish and self-centered, and I did it for a reason, provocative, whatever, to get people's attention. And I do believe that there is well-being has maybe been a little overused, and maybe we shut down, we stop listening. But I say all that to get to a point, the point where we are this afternoon. I am touched in my own heart by what the two of you are saying, by taking me to task. And then listening to what you all have to say, I realize that you help me help my own well-being, and understanding that those maybe aren't the right words to use. But it is nice. And and I am learning.
I'm sorry, Briggs, as I interrupt.
Go ahead.
I would just say that those words are provocative. And I think it's important that you laid it out in that way in the article that you wrote, because in many ways, that's part of the problem with regard to the profession, right? We're taught that it is selfish. And then we internalize it and we believe it to be selfish. Being the masterful mediator that you are, however, you're accustomed to reframing. You're accustomed to reframing, right? And I think that that's part of why this conversation is so important, is that maybe as a profession, we do need to reframe and rethink, what does it mean to take care of ourselves? And maybe we don't need to perceive it as a form of selfishness, but instead a form of self-care and something that we have to do. And, you know, all of this started with the conversation of, can sole practitioners and small firm lawyers take care of themselves? Can we engage in well-being related practices? And I think the lesson from our conversation, you know, a while back and today is that, yes, we can, but we just need to be purposeful about how we move in that direction. So in that regard, the conversation's a really important one, because we are having to call into question what it is that we've been taught and what we believe, and maybe how as a profession we start to recalibrate, because it's time. I think the younger generation of lawyers that are coming out of law school are very good about reminding us, right? It's time, and we need to do this, and we need to be purposeful about focusing on how we look at well-being through a different lens.
The Solutions Group, the State Bar of New Mexico's EAP provider, offers confidential and free professional counselors to support employees and their direct family members by offering short-term counseling, assessment, and referrals for any life struggle. This includes drug addiction, relationship conflict, anxiety, depression, and grief and loss. Other services include dependent care, crisis assessment, intervention, and educational presentations, free well-being webinars, and an online stress assessment tool. Call 505-254-3555 or 1-866-254-3555 and identify with NMJ Lab to schedule an appointment or video visit.
You say it so well.
Yeah.
And Jim, you and I have you and I have talked about, you use the word meditation, and that's the word everyone uses. I guess since we're chatting today, I'll just and Pam Moore, year and a half ago, I kind of reacted not all that well to meditation. I just thought it troubled me as a word. It seemed like it had rules and regulations, and I just didn't react that well to, well, I have to do this and I have to hold my hands this way and whatnot. But Pam got me to agree, or not agree. I volunteered to do 30 days on a internet kind of meditation thing every morning for 10 minutes, and it got my attention. And you've heard, I've had this lecture with you. You've been polite enough to listen, but just to share my own little story. One of the things that is in this last year and a half that I've realized about myself in terms of taking care of myself. You all have talked about some things that are far more touching than mine, than I'm about to tell you, but I have what I call the bookends in my day. And I get up every morning. I have, many know I'm a recovering alcoholic, recovering drunk, that's more fun for me to say. But I go to lots of 12-step meetings. I get up early in the morning. But before I go to my 12-step meeting, I sit still. I call it be still. I get a cup of coffee. I'm just still for 10 minutes. And I've gotten the 10 minutes. There happened to be a piece of music that I heard in one of these 30-day sessions that Pam Moore tricked me into. But the piece of music was Southern Sea. And I'm going blank on the author's name, but it's a very unusual piece of music that listening to it, it sounds as if you're on a tramp steamer in the middle of the Southern Sea, and the Southern Sea happens to be below the 60th parallel, which is down somewhere between the tip of South America or the tip of Africa and the South Pole, and it's like a ship that's creaking and whatnot. And I sit there and visualize myself sitting in a deck chair with a cup of coffee. I don't know where I'm going or when I'll get there, but the piece of music goes for 9 minutes and X seconds. And I have pretty religiously done that every morning. And it's a moment when I'm able to just be still. And at the end of the day, I do what I call twilight, and that is shortly after sunset. And there's a story behind that as well that's personal to me, but I sit and I go over the day, the good and the bad. It's kind of my wrap up. And it took me a long time to realize that I was doing something. I wasn't going to the gym. I wasn't doing some of those things that we traditionally associate with well-being, but I had to realize, as I've learned from the two of you today, that touched me so much, is that it's doing some of those intentional things in your life. And for me, it's something I do that makes a difference. And it's a little thing, it's personal, but I've tried to get you to do it. And the nice thing, and you acknowledge it today, Jim, you said I've tried it and by gosh, it works. But let me ask you, we're all getting a little mushy here, but what is it about, and I'm not picking this on you, but what is it about some things? Tina's talked about her pillow. What is it about some of those things that they're there, but we don't end up doing them? Why does that? Why do we somehow they fall by the wayside, even though we know they're good for us? And I'll pick on you first, Jim, and then we're getting close to the end here, so we'll wrap up here in a second.
I don't know, Briggs. I just don't know. I mean, that's a tough question. So I guess the only thing I would say is that, I'm fortunate enough in the firm environment that I'm in, where the attorneys that I work with, it's a good environment to be yourself and take time for yourself. So if you can create that, Tina, I don't know how you do it as a solo practitioner, so my hat's off to you. But if you can create some environment for yourself that gives you a little room to take time for yourself, I think that's great. But I mean, I could probably talk all day long about how the practice of law should change and things like that. But when it comes to this kind of stuff, I think it really is just up to you. And I think, like most people, I bang my head against the wall and I try things, and then I don't stick with them when I know maybe I should, but I keep trying, and little by little, I make progress, I guess, as a well-being, from a well-being standpoint. So, it's just up to everybody individually and what they want to do. But I haven't figured out a silver bullet for anything yet, but I'm happier now than I have been. It's been great for me, actually, to start taking time to do little things. So that's really all I can say.
Well, we are near the end here, so I'm going to let Tina off the hook. And I had a plan, and I'm going to carry through with it for a closing. But because it was something Jim said to Nessa and I that I thought was so profound. But I have to say that, Tina, you said the same thing in Tina's words earlier today, that and I'm not kidding here. The two of you have touched me. I'm older than all of you. I've been a lawyer longer than all of you. You have taught me something today about who I am and who I should be, and maybe some things that I had to think about. But I'm quoting now from Jim when we were all talking together, and he said the following: I could talk about individual steps we could take, or the firm environment, or steps law firms could take to promote well-being, but it's really about how do I get to the point where you have to make some changes to be healthier and be happier. And that is so true. And Tina, you said it in spades. You had to, you made a decision that where you needed to go was to go back to where you grew up, to be with family. And those were the intentional things you did. Those were the leap of faith that you took to find that joyful place, to use your words from the last session. So I think it's been a wonderful discussion today.
Briggs,
so
I'm gonna have to interrupt you. You're
okay,
not gonna be able to wrap this up without
okay.
having the opportunity to shower you with goodness and positivity, because you have really been a trailblazer in this arena for so many years. You know, working with JLAP, appearing at swearing-in ceremonies, to welcome new lawyers and to encourage them to focus on their well-being. I don't know how many swearing-in ceremonies I've sat in on, and I always looked forward to hearing your message and hearing from you. And the fact that you have, continued to make yourself available to visit with New Mexico lawyers, to encourage them to focus on their well-being, is such an important thing. And, the reminder that comes out from today for me is we can learn from one another. And I'm going to go adopt that bookend approach. And I hope some will walk away with the be good to yourself message as well, and I think the last thing that I just want to share is that we also need to be good to others around us, right? Having heard from you all just reminds me that we can really support and uplift one another in this profession. There was a recent passing of, Miss USA, Chesley Christ, I believe is her name. She died by suicide. She was an attorney, as I understand it. And when I was hearing the news reports that morning, a very prominent news personality said she seemed to be so strong, and this would not be something that would happen to her. But it serves as a heartened reminder that we need to check in on our strong friends, right? The ones that seem like they're, thriving and doing so well. So, what I've taken from our visit today is that we need to also check in on one another. And this conversation that we've had has been a good way of looking at how it is that we can help sustain one another within the profession and lift each other up. So thank you again, Briggs, for taking the lead. And Jim, to be able to visit with you in this context has really just been such a privilege. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you. Yeah. No, thank you, Tina.
What a beautiful way to end. And you're right, Tina. I hope that we all remember that. It's reaching out to others. It's there's so much for our own well-being. So thank you. And so thank you to everyone for listening to Legal Wellbeing in Action. If you have some thoughts on what we've talked about today and want to reach out, please email well, W-E-L-L, at sbnm.org. And tune in next month to hear our episode on the UNM School of Law, another legal community in our bar. So thank you all. And Tina and Jim, thank you so much. You've touched my life today. So thank you.
Thanks, Briggs. Thanks, Tina.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. This episode was produced by the State Bar of New Mexico's Wellbeing Committee and the New Mexico Judges and Lawyers Assistance Program. All editing and sound mixing was done by Blue Sky eLearn. Intro music is by Gil Flores. The views of the presenters are that of their own and are not endorsed by the State Bar of New Mexico. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, or legal advice. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition.